Freedom. What does it mean to you? Greetings and good vibes, y'all. Welcome back to the Leon Block. I'm your guy, Jontel. This webisode, I will be joined with a guest, and we will take you from the origins of Juneteenth to the current prison industrial complex relationships, trauma, and so much more. Happening. The rough outlines of Juneteenth's origins are either familiar or unfamiliar to many. On June 19th in 1865, General George Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and delivered the news that effectively Immediately, the enslaved people of Texas were apparently so-called free. What they call freedom was finally coming to the approximately 200,000 African Americans that were held in bondage in Texas, but it came belatedly. Obviously, this is something that has just now been widespread, and a lot of people have been talking about it since 2020, really getting into and understanding the history. But what is less publicized surrounding Juneteenth is that General Granger's General Order 3 also stated, quote, "The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages." The fact that African American Texans were now free did not mean an automatic change in their circumstances, and the terms of their freedom actually encouraged dependence on the people that had exploited their labor for years. This clause reveals one of the central ironies and lessons of Juneteenth. Freedom is not the same as liberty. The work of full-scale liberation is a continuing and uncertain process that requires radical acts of faith, but also real and widespread structural change. In our current movement, we see so many signs that the structure has not changed, aside from the obvious and well-publicized cases of Black murder at the hands of law enforcement and the judicial system. Coordinated attacks have been made against important civil rights legislation and the ability of citizens' votes to be counted. In so many ways, we are being encouraged to remain silent and collect wages while the real work of liberation remains to be done. But Juneteenth reminds us that until all of us are free, none of us are free. It is a day that should compel each and every human being to imagine and work towards a world where true liberty, not just state-sanctioned emancipation, is a reality for all. If it isn't just a day to cook out or listen to music. This is a day to reflect on the past and observe liberty. The movie 13th, the documentary directed by Ava DuVernay, discusses the U.S. prison system and reveals the history of racial inequality in the country. And it touches on the theme of incarceration as a form of slavery, given the loophole of the 13th Amendment. But this amendment may have abolished slavery, so-called, but the phrasing quote, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, and we'll get into that in a little bit, led to African American males being arrested and convicted over minor crimes at a higher rate than white men. Now, there's so much to dig into here alone, but there's so much more that a personal testimony, I should say, can provide deeper context on. So joining me this episode is Tasliym, first of seven of Chester, PA. Greetings and good vibes, fam. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Peace and blessings. I'm well. Thank you for having me.
No, it's seriously a pleasure. We've been in contact for quite a while. I got in contact with you through some speaking that you did at our state capitol here in Pennsylvania, and since then, like, I always wanted to connect with you. And after seeing on social media, you connect with people and you see the kind of things they post, and having similar uh, paths in this fight and our paths crossing, I knew that the day would come, and here we are.
Yes.
I want to ask you right off the bat, what does first of seven mean?
So first of seven is literally just my title, right? I have it tattooed on the front of me like a name tag. I'm my mother's first child of her seven daughters. My mother has seven daughters and she has four stepsons, and I'm her first daughter. And so it means a lot to me because I did not have the honor of carrying my father's name. My name was changed at the age of 3 to reflect a man that is not biologically aligned to me at all. Um,
Uh,
and then I got married, and my last name changed to Goodman, and that doesn't really belong to me. So at this moment, first to seven is the only thing that connects me to the things that are important to me. Um, well, besides my children, the most important to me until I can change my name again to reflect the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with.
right, right, and that's also something that we will talk about and get into as well.
Yes.
Tell me a little more about yourself. Like, where are you from? How did you end up in Chester? And like, what kind of work are you involved in? And like, what do you feel like your purpose is now?
So where am I from? I always tell people I'm from everywhere and nowhere. So I
Right,
was born in North Carolina, but I've never lived in North Carolina. I think I lived in North Carolina for about 3 months. And then my mother is from Chester, Pennsylvania, and her maternal and paternal
right,
lines are here in Chester, Pennsylvania. And so I moved back here to Chester, Pennsylvania, I believe when I was less than 1 years old. And then my mother moved us to Virginia when I was like 8, I believe. And then I left Virginia and went to Brooklyn, New York. And then I stayed in Brooklyn, New York for like 8 to 9 years. And then I ended up coming back to Chester, Pennsylvania, because my mother passed away. And it just became really difficult to come back and forth to check on my grandmother.
right.
And she's not moving to Brooklyn, New York. So I had to move to Chester, Pennsylvania.
Okay. So so would it be safe to say like you made this your home? Like, have you settled in?
No, I wouldn't say that because I don't like to settle anywhere. This has just been the
Right,
location that I've been in the longest as of this point because I don't want to uproot my children anymore. I
right,
want them to be able to have lasting relationships and foundations. That's something that I didn't get to have as a child because we moved excessively.
right.
And so I wasn't able to keep relationships or develop childhood friendships into adult friendships, right? So my friendships that I have now are mostly adult in orientation.
Right.
But I still keep connections to people that I went to school with in elementary school and high school and middle school, but it's not the same
Right.
when you're not able to attend weddings and baby showers and things like that because you lose the connection. So I didn't want to do that to my children. So I'm here in Chester, Pennsylvania, at least for another year so that my third child can graduate high school next year.
So real quick about Chester, can you give people who aren't? I'm familiar with Chester just because, for example, like I grew up in Coatesville, and I don't know what you know about between like Chester and Coatesville, like a basketball rivalry, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also similarities with like the demographics and the poverty and the environmental racism, and
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different similarities between both cities. So I'm very familiar with Chester, but for those that's listening nationwide, like tell people a little bit about Chester.
Well, the irony is right now, if you look at Chester, Pennsylvania, you would just assume that this is, heavily black population. Chester, Pennsylvania is poverty. Chester, Pennsylvania is, you know, all the negative connotations that come along with being in the slums, I guess you would call it. However, Chester has a very rich culture when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to music, when it comes to the fight for educational quality, when it comes to, eliminating racism, all of these things, historical first. Chester is so many beautiful things that unfortunately are overshadowed by what the media decides to shed light on. And not to say that those things are not worthy of attention, because it is an epidemic here in Chester, Pennsylvania, as related to gun violence and crime. But that is not the only history of Chester, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Very much in the same way as Newark, New Jersey, Compton, California. These are places that are known for one thing, but not known for also the historic nature and the
Yes,
achievements that they've made, the rich cultural diversity, and the rich diversity of history as well. You are so on point with that.
absolutely.
Um,
Right here in front of my house, if I look out of my window and step outside of my front door and I look up there at this hospital that's labeled Sacred Heart, before it
mm,
was Sacred Heart, that was the monastery. I believe that's what it's called, monastery that Martin Luther King received his doctrine. I
oh,
believe that's what it's called. Yes. So yes, right there. When I walk out, that's just when I walk out my door. So I
wow.
look at it every day, and I know that piece of information. But most people don't even know that. So it's a lot about Chester that is unknown, and not because it's hard to find out, but just because people choose to, not educate themselves.
And I think that there's a lot of explanation for that, and it does have a lot to do with not just redlining, but also like a mental captivity. And they call Palestine an open air prison,
Mm-hmm.
and that's essentially what many pockets of America are as well.
Yes.
And in an overall context, that's essentially what we're going to dig at today. So, like, I gave a little excerpt about Juneteenth. I want you to educate the people a bit about Juneteenth as well, because you know way more than I do. Honestly, I had heard of Juneteenth growing up. My family
Mm-hmm.
never educated me on it. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that I jumped on and started looking into until 2 years ago. So I'm
Okay.
very new to this, and I take to heart that I don't know as much as I would like to know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing as much as I can in due time, not trying to overwhelm myself because there's so many
Yes.
other things that I'm researching as well. But I feel like this is very important as a descendant of the enslaved to know as much about this as possible, not because we're free, but to
Mm-hmm.
understand where the origins of the concept of freedom and the intricacies of the 13th Amendment and all of that can be traced back to in the context of explaining this whole situation deeper to people. So
Mm-hmm.
for that sake, I do want to point something out real quick, and we'll start from there because I was using. I don't know if I still have it up. I don't, but if you look at this poster here, I have the flag here, and it's just straight across, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you sent me this, and then I'm looking at other pictures, and that's the flag that I see as well. So tell me, what is the difference, and where did that like it? What is the meaning of like that curvature? Is there any kind of significance to that?
Yeah, so that curvature represents a brand new horizon. So it's supposed to represent the sun. And you know, when you see this, especially even if you listen to the Black National Anthem, you know, facing the rising sun of our new day begun. When the sun rises, it's a curve. So that's what the curve represents. Is just looking beyond that horizon to what's next, right? Remembering the past, but knowing that every day that we're allowed to wake up we're forging on. So that's what that curve represents.
And while we're at it, the colors, what are they?
So just about this flag in general, right? So this flag wasn't designed until 1997, right? So it's a fairly new flag, 25 years, almost hitting its 26th birthday.
Mm.
Um, it was created in June 1997 by an activist by the name of Boston Ben. His real name is Ben Haif. He designed this flag because he himself has started to learn more about Juneteenth and the liberation of, the last enslaved people out of Galveston, Texas. And he said we needed something that represented that, right? So, in order to truly understand this flag, I feel, as with anything that's new, a lot is not done to dig up the past, right? So we just, we want to know because it's something and it impacts us, but we don't really do due diligence as people overall when it comes to really digging into learning the historical impact of a thing. So for me, I learned about Juneteenth when I was in first grade because my teacher, Mrs. Smith, gave us a project to look up our birth date and tell her something significant about our birthday. So since I was in first grade, which was a very long time ago, I've known what Juneteenth was. And I took it as a mark of honor and great privilege to know that I was born on this day. And the day that I was born also happened to be Father's Day. So this Sunday is a complete replication of my exact birth, right?
Right.
And it means a lot to me because it helped me develop this sense of um, courageousness about who I am. So anytime someone would ask me, "Oh, when's your birthday?"
Hmm.
My way of spreading with Juneteenth has always been to just tell people Juneteenth. I'll never give people the day. So somebody say, "Oh, well, what's that?" Look it up, right?
Right.
So that's how I have been sharing what Juneteenth is since I was a child.
Mm.
And for me, it goes a little further than just June 19th, 1865. I feel like to really understand Juneteenth and why, because we've talked, and I'm very adamant about this red, white, and blue, right? I despise with a passion black, red, and green being utilized on Juneteenth because yes, we have, the Emancipation Proclamation, which did not free slaves. So I really need for people to
Thank
stop
you.
giving Lincoln so much credit for that
He don't
because
get none. I've seen people call him the great emancipator. I'm like, what?
yes,
He
he did
would have
nothing, right? It was
freedom.
basically used as a bait for people to
Yep.
switch over to the Union, right? So he put it out there in I think September of 1942, I believe. Whenever it was first, I don't really have those dates together, but I know it was a couple of months before he actually even said anything about um it actually going into effect because he was using it as if you don't join the union, then I'm going to emancipate your slaves, right? And there is a comment that if he could have ended that civil war without freeing a
Without sleep.
single
Yep.
slave, he
He
would
would
have
have.
done that. So
Yep.
we as a people have to be very careful about casually inviting people to the proverbial cookout, right? We have
Yep.
to stop doing that. We are erecting universities in this man's name. We are doing all of these things, and he did nothing for us.
Agree.
Technically, nothing. Even if you read the Emancipation Proclamation, you will see that there are selected states that are actually exempt from everything that's listed in the Emancipation Proclamation because they decided to join the Union. So they were able to keep their slaves that they had enslaved. right? So I
Mhm.
won't go on a tangent of that, but we have to educate ourselves. But
Yes.
if we move a little further, the early 1800s, 1816, the United States at that time had put together this American Colonization Society, right? And this society was made up of people like James Madison, and their thing was, okay, so we have now freed people, right? We have black people in this, right at that moment, and the United States, who are freed people. We also have slaves that have gained their freedom, right?
Right.
So, what do we do with these people? Do we leave them here? Do we send them back to Africa? What do we do with them? So, this society decided to raise funds, and in their mind, they're like, we're going to send them back to Africa,
Right.
right? So they have this Mayflower of Liberia, is what it was called, and I believe in 1820 is when they actually first put about 100 free black people and formerly enslaved black people on this boat and shipped them back to West Africa, to Liberia, right? How coincidental that it's called Liberia, and Liberia translates to liberty, right?
Right.
So when you look at words, you have to understand what liberty is, because we use liberty and freedom interchangeably and they're not the same thing, right?
Right.
Liberty just means that you have the ability to move around in your space without oppression and restrictions, right? So
Right.
freedom is being able to do those in a free way, right? They're not the same. They sound the same, but they're not the same.
Mhm.
Um, and so we have, everyone's thinking, oh, we're doing the right thing. We're sending them back to Africa because it will be so difficult to integrate them into this country after we've treated them this way for all these years or whatever. And then here you have the black people saying, we don't want to go back
Right.
because we put our blood, sweat, and tears here, right? So Liberia technically is the first project. You know how we have project housing
Right.
complexes here, and they say, oh, this is the project. Literally, it was a project. Let's see what happens with these group of people when we put them in the worst areas with the least resources. And what happens in America, we turn those projects into our communities, right? So the same thing happened in Liberia. You want to give me nothing? I'm going to show you that I can turn it into something. So in
Mhm.
July 26, 1847, Liberia gains its, independence. It's declared independent. And the person that becomes the first president of Liberia is actually a man named Joseph Roberts from where? Virginia. Crazy, right? So
Mm.
this freed man from Virginia is now the first president of the independent nation of Liberia. Now, the United States of America doesn't accept them as an independent nation, of course, because how dare you take independence from the United States, and we're the ones that brought the land and placed you there when you didn't even want to be there, right? But again, we take something out of nothing and we make it beautiful.
Right.
So now you have the independent state of Liberia. Now that independence being acknowledged by the United States is happening in 1862, right? So what do we have going on over here? And at that time, we have, the general order is being, sounded off. So now these free slaves that been migrated, because those that are in Texas originally weren't in Texas. People were migrating their slaves to Texas to escape the Civil War. So those
Uh,
slaves that were in Texas were from Mississippi, Georgia, Virginia, everywhere,
right.
right? These are just Texas just didn't want no part of it, so they was not part of it, and so people started migrating to Texas. Um, and then we have 1865 comes, and we have this general order, you know, stating that these persons are free. Now, my thing is, if you really, really look at it, if the Emancipation Proclamation actually freed slaves, why did you need the 13th Amendment and a general order to further come along and say that they were free, right? So, with these two orders, persons in the United States are no longer slaves. That's what we believe, right? But then you have that little language, except. Anytime something
Right.
says except, that means that, oh, so we're not really doing away with this. We're not doing away with this. We are just recategorizing it, right? So, you're not a slave unless we make you property again. And how do we make you property again? By creating, punishments for things that are minute, such as not crossing the street in the crosswalk,
Yes. Yes.
so that we lock you up for things such as walking through the cotton field at 9 o'clock at night instead of 7 o'clock at night, so that we, think whatever it is that
So
we
hold
feel.
on real quick because I was about to give you that outline because I knew you were gonna go into it. So like
Mhm.
this is basically what Tasliym is saying is that we're gonna basically walk you through from Juneteenth how this never ended, right?
Yes.
Because with the Civil War and with the abolition of slavery, quote unquote abolition, there
Hmm.
was what was called the Reconstruction. And when I think of Reconstruction, I think of Reconstruction of slavery. I
Hmm.
think of
Hmm.
how they found ways. So what you're now referring to is like the black codes, and then we
Yes.
go from, and I'm gonna let you keep going, but we go from black codes to convict leasing to debt peonage to Jim Crow, and then to the war on drugs.
Hmm.
So you were describing like some of the black codes that they use to lawfully be able to justify how they could lock up black people to have them do the same very things that they were already doing. And like I pointed out before, a lot of when the general came through and he made that proclamation, he also stated that they were ordered to still stay on their farms and work.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
how was what freedom is there?
None at all. None at all. Not only did they not have freedom, they didn't have liberty either, because like I said, liberty requires space and no oppression within that space. So
Right.
it really was just words on paper, right? And so you still have chain gangs. You still have chain gangs today. But I go back to the colors because you asked me about the colors of the flag. And
Yes.
like I said, all of that relates to the colors of the flag right now. So if you look at the Liberia's flag is red, white, and blue stripes with one star, right? So at this time, everyone in Liberia is aware of the fact that we're here as a product of being removed from America. Now, just imagine that this group right now is the descendants of two displaced populations, a
Right.
population that's removed from Africa and placed in the United States, and then removed from the United States and placed back in Africa, but not where they were taken from, right?
Right.
So you have this awareness, of we are Americans, right? If you look at the flags in Africa, I believe Liberia is maybe one of two flags that are red, white, and blue,
Wow.
right? And it matters. It all matters. It might not matter to people that are just, I'm black, red, and green in it. But for the most part, most people do not agree with the movement behind the black, red, and green flag. They have, once again, there's no historical research being done on it, because the person that started that movement, Marcus Garvey, was a Jamaican born male. He started that movement in Jamaica, and it didn't really pick up with the persons of Jamaica because they're aware of their Africanism, right? So it didn't really fly there. That movement didn't fly. So what did he do? Come to Harlem, to the slums, where black people are looking for an identity, right?
Right.
So this is like 1920, I believe, somewhere around that area, looking for an identity. And if my dates are wrong, please forgive me. Just go back, fact check it, or whatever, but you get the concept of what I'm saying. He
Yeah.
comes to a place where we're searching for something. And this happens in jail too. I always want to tie the two things back to back, right? Because in jail, you have the preachers that go in, the chaplains, all these religions, they want to go in and get people when they don't have a sense of who they are,
Right.
right? So we're here in America. We want so bad to be us, right? So someone comes over to you and they tell you, Africa is beautiful. We have to acknowledge Africa. We have to do this. We have to know our cultural roots. And at the same time, you are completely ignoring the years and years up to now of the history and struggle of the African in America, right?
Yes.
So you're
Yes.
telling me that none of that means anything, and that the only thing I should find beauty in is Africa, right? And that's not fair. That's
Oh,
not fair, because it doesn't lend credit to all of the people that helped us to come out of that part of our history up until that moment, right? So, you know, that black, red, and green flag represents separatism. And if you speak to most black Americans, they don't really want to be separated. They want to be equally yoked, right? When we had the opportunity to be separate but equal, we fought against it, right? No, I don't want my own restaurant. I want to go in this restaurant and eat where they don't want me there, right? If you really adhere to the principles of that black, red, and green flag, you wouldn't have wanted to go in that restaurant. You would have made sure you built your own restaurant and sat in
Right.
there, right?
Right.
The principles of that black, red, and green flag also says that the Ku Klux Klan should be able to exist as an entity. Why? Because they also believe in separatism. So there's a lot behind that black, red, and green flag that most people are not aware
Right.
of. And
Right.
we wave it because,
Right.
listen, we need identity, right?
Right.
We need identity. But I feel like this Juneteenth flag is the best representation of who we collectively want to be as people, equal on this land that we help develop, fight for, and progress, right?
Agreed.
As one. So you see the one star in the middle with the burst of stars on the outside representing the colonies. This is us. This is us,
Mm.
right? So this is why I feel so strongly that do not fly that black, red, and green flag on Juneteenth. If you want to fly it during Black History Month, you want to fly it whenever else, but
Right.
don't fly it on Juneteenth because it's like a slap in the face because there is a historical connection to why that flag needs to remain black, red, and white. I mean, red, white, and blue on Juneteenth, right? And I feel like we also need to go back and do more research on Liberia and give back to Liberia because we are the first inhabitants of Liberia. That country belongs to free Black Americans, right? And we have to pour into that country. It's right now they have the same issues we have over here: lack of education, malnourished, access to quality food, all of those things, right? But why? Because they're an independent Black nation, the first independent Black nation in Africa, right? And we skip right past it. Why? Because we don't know the history of the location. We go to Ghana, we go to Egypt, we go to all these places that we want to go in Africa, but we don't visit where our people made a space for us, right?
Exactly.
The Asians, they come to America. Everybody knows where to come find their people. When Puerto Ricans come over here, when Indians come over here, they know where to find their people. There was a place prepared for us in Africa.
Yep.
Come here. We are you, you are us, right? And we go right past it. We don't even stop, you know? So I know that was a lot, but it means a lot to me because the history is important.
It really is. It really is. And something you pointed out was the fact that so many people. I was talking to someone today, and they're a person of color. They're not, black, but they were talking about, again, they're a person of color, and they're talking about going to Italy, and they want to see Europe, and I'm like, I want to see Africa, and they're like, Africa, why? And I'm like, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's my thought is that, and especially for so many black people, it's like the Eurocentric nature of our media, and that's important. Information is important. The way that it's brought to you and the way that you dissect it is very important. And
Mm-hmm.
subliminally, we pick up on a lot that we don't necessarily register with. Um, a lot of us don't pick up on it at all. We just consume it. And one of
Yes.
those things is the Eurocentric nature of everything. And so many people are fascinated with the glamorous way that they'll portray lots of Eurocentric things, but when it comes to Afrocentric things, especially the whole continent of Africa as a whole, it's downplayed or diminished. And there's so many beautiful places, whether you're talking about urban or you're talking about rural. Africa is beautiful and rich and diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's so many different places, especially sub-Saharan, that are deserving of not tourism per se, but actively learning as our people to learn and open ourselves up
Mm-hmm.
uh, these places rather than go to the lands of the people that descend from the people that oppressed us for so long. Like it just
Mhm.
doesn't make any sense to me. And not that I'm
Mhm.
not interested in European culture. I like all culture. So I'm interested in everything. I don't discriminate. But I don't have an interest in going to Europe until I go to Africa first.
Mhm. And you know what I normally say? I don't have an interest in going to Africa until I fully have developed a true understanding of my history here first, right? Because I'm removed from Africa,
Right.
right? And most people think that just being dark skinned, is enough to say that you're African. But I have had Africans tell me flat out in my 9 years that I lived in Brooklyn, New York, that I was not African, and they are clear
Yep.
about the difference, right? We don't know the language. How many Black Americans going to sit down and learn at least one dialect of African language, right?
Right.
You don't know about the food. When you see them, most of you all are mocking them, right? Because of the way that they live.
Yep.
So while we may share, lineage, which if you go back far enough, we all share everything.
Right.
So we can't just say that it's because of the lineage, because at some point the lineage doesn't mean anything. In some states, you can marry your fourth and fifth cousin because they acknowledge that the lineage at some point
I
means
try
nothing.
to explain it to people this way is like this around the same time that we were brought to America, right?
Mm-hmm,
Is the same time that African slaves were brought to Puerto Rico and all through the
mm-hmm,
Caribbean and South America. We all grew and molded in different ways. So when we look at Puerto Ricans, we look at them as a peoples. We don't look at
mm-hmm.
them as people from Africa or indigenous
Yes,
people or
yes.
European. We look at them as a group of people. So why are we not looking at African Americans or Black people in that way too? Like we're not African. We're not like
Well,
we
I
are.
can tell you
Well,
what
we are
I can
African,
tell
but
you.
we've come into our own being of people over the few hundred years that we've been here, and we deserve the same kind of like outlook as Puerto Ricans in that sense. Does that make sense?
It does, but you want me to tell you something that all other um identities share, right?
Hmm.
They know who they are. They know who they are. They're not fighting over, am I going to use a red,
Agreed.
white, and blue flag or a black, red, and green flag for
Right.
Juneteenth? They're not arguing over, do I want to be called a Negro or a Black American or African American? They're not arguing over, do I want to be a Sadidi Black person or a non-Sadidi? They don't have those issues, right? The
There's a reason
most
for that
issue
too.
that they have is my skin is darker than yours, so you're treating me different, because that happens across all cultures, right?
Right.
We as a people don't have our shit together.
Right.
And that's the difference. We don't know what we want. We argue about everything. We can't come to a definitive on anything. And so,
And I
because
think
we can't come to a definitive on anything, how is someone else supposed to look at us and come to a definitive on anything? Right.
right.
And it's really sad because I have worked in global organizations for the last 4 years out of the UK, and they know the difference. Let me tell you something. A Black American is not looked at the same as an American, a Black person from the UK,
Oh
nor a
yeah.
Black person from Africa. I'm at the bottom of that
Oh
totem
yeah.
pole. You hear
Oh
what I'm
yeah.
telling you? When it comes to pay, when it comes to my what they perceive as my intellectual
Yep.
ability, I'm at the
Yep.
bottom. So everyone knows, besides the people that need to know, that there is a difference, even in the Blackness and where you're from.
Oh
So
yeah.
we have to stop wanting to attach ourselves so bad to something that is so removed from us, and understand that we are here. We have developed history here. We have
Yep.
developed culture here. We have a togetherness. We have a way of loving one another. We have a way of being with one another that we
Yep.
need to identify the commonalities in that. When I look at TikTok and Facebook and social media, what's good about these things is that we see each other. I'm like, oh, you've been
Right.
going through that too. Oh, you was raised that way too. Oh, that happened in your house too. We're going through the same things. This is our weave, right? This is what our quilt is made out of. We need to be satisfied with our quilt. Even when I was watching The Black is King that Beyonce did, I noticed that when the young man was in Africa, everything was beautiful for him, right? Family, culture. The minute that he came to America, everything just supposedly went black. He doing drugs and fell all out and didn't come back to himself until he went back to Africa. Why does it have to be that everything synonymous
Right,
with black in America
right,
has to be so negative? We are
right.
still standing here in spite of. You can come to this country
Talk.
free in spite of. So we have to stand on that and let people know we are proud of who we are. We don't have to identify with anything else except for who we are. And to start doing that, we need to be unified in a few things. We need to be unified in what we're going to call ourselves. We need to be unified in the flag that we're going to fly. And we need to be unified in the principles that we're going to stand on. That's what we need to do.
I think all of those three things is what makes up a group of peoples, and I would, it would be safe to say that the rest of our, the diaspora across the world, our brothers and sisters are waiting for us to stand up on our own 2 feet and do that.
Yes.
And I think once we do that, they would have a lot more respect for us. You know what I
Yes.
mean? We wouldn't be, they wouldn't come here and look at us the way that they do. And I'm not
Yes.
saying that to look at us in a bad way, but I'm saying we have to hold accountability for ourselves sometimes. We've been through a lot of shit, but again, we still here. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason for that.
Yes.
I know we went off on a whole tangent, and we got like 20 minutes left of this episode, which is cool
Mm-hmm.
because we can, like, around 55 minutes we can cut it, and then we can jump into like the other part of what I want to get into, which is the prison
Mm-hmm.
industrial complex and the nature of black relationships today, albeit via the war on drugs. So that's the second part I want to do, and we can do like a
Yes.
little 25-minute thing of that, right?
Yes.
But for the rest of this, we got about 15-20 minutes. So what I want to get into is, like, we were talking about the black code, and I want to follow through that really quick, like convict
Mm-hmm.
leasing, debt peonage to Jim Crow. Do you know the distinctions well enough between those to give people like a tidbit?
Know the differences between Jim Crow and the Black Codes.
Yeah, and like convict leasing. Do you know? Have you heard about debt peonage? I'm just like, I'm still trying to get down the distinctions between all of these, but they were different things, and there was like different eras of them, and they overlapped as well.
No, so I'm not familiar with that term that you just used now, but I am familiar with the differences between Black Code and Jim Crow, right? So
Right,
Black Codes, if I how can I put this? You know how we have like federal law, right?
right,
And then the federal law goes out, but then states can take that federal law and use it the way that they want to use it,
right,
right? So let's just say we say now all black people are free. But then you have a state that's going to say, oh well, we're going to enact these codes that restrict
yep,
or limit that freedom that they just received, right? So um how can I say it? Mm, I'm trying to think of what's I'm trying to say what is a code that I can throw out there that people would listen, because this is one that still exists. Sun up, sun down, right?
right,
Sun up, sun down cities, right? Now, most people are not aware that this is an actual thing, but there were places that black people literally could not be once the sun went down,
right,
right? And there's still places that even though somebody doesn't legally tell you you can't be there, you know you should not be there after the sun goes down. So this
mhm,
is something that you could actually be picked up for and sent to jail. Small things like looking at not lowering your gaze, right? Um
mhm,
but Jim Crow, the difference with Jim Crow is that this was something that was, how can I put it? If let's say if the president says something, this is something that we all have to adhere to, right? So Jim Crow is a term of segregation that is throughout. You don't get to pick and choose if you're going to do these things. Jim Crow
mhm,
is, oh, y'all can't sit in the front of the bus. Jim Crow is, you can't drink from that water fountain. Jim Crow is, you can't go to that school. These are things that are permeated throughout the entirety of the South, right? And they don't change. You know that when you go into this place, you can't drink from that water fountain. You know what I'm saying? That's Jim
Mhm.
Crow. Black code is something that literally people just making up off the side. Let's say, oh, we forgot about that. They standing on the left side of the street. Tell them they got to stand on the right side. If they standing on the left side, lock them up. Right? That's the difference. Jim Crow was a legal system of separating black people from white people. Um, if that makes any sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. So black codes was definitely more informal. Jim Crow was more
Yes.
across the board, more concrete, more federally um, hands down. And even though it was known to be a southern thing, it definitely was something that went on in the north, but it
Yes.
took a different kind of form. It was
Mm-hmm.
more free flowing, but it definitely was something that happened up here too. And I think that's also where like redlining became very concrete and was used as a way of Jim Crow in the North in
Mm-hmm.
many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and what I'm looking at as far as like convict leasing would be like the chain gangs, and debt peonage was a form of the convict leasing and chain gangs in a sense where you you were charged with something that you had to pay for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't tell you that there was interest compounded, so they found
Yes.
ways to keep you indebted to them, which is still another form of slavery. It's still
Yes.
another form of comic leasing. It was
Mm-hmm.
just the way that it was termed or the way that they found a way to do it. But it all when one thing was like banned or they said that they couldn't do it, they just found another way, like debt
Yes.
peonage or comic leasing. They interchanged one for the other to have going on as well. So these
Yes.
things um, never really died in any form, even in voluntary servitude as well. All three of these things, convict leasing, debt peonage, and voluntary servitude, still go on today. They are
Mm-hmm.
still things that are happening here in America, along with child trafficking, sex trafficking. These are things that are still going on as well. Peonage is also called debt slavery or debt servitude, a system where an employer compels a worker to pay off a debt with work.
Yes.
Legally, peonage was outlawed in 1867, but it's been well known to be very throughout the South all the way up until Jim Crow. And then there's this one video that this one, it's called "The Part of History You've Always Skipped: Neo-Slavery," and it literally walks you through it. And this white guy, he's amazing. He used to be like a social studies teacher, and he admits he didn't know like true American history
Mm-hmm.
until he started doing YouTube videos and realized like, oh shit. So he went back and he walks you through in a very efficient way, and kind of like gives you clip bits of what each thing means and really digs into it. And then I have
Mm-hmm.
a few articles here that I will attach to this video at a later date. But this one talks about the loophole with the 13th Amendment. And this video, Convict Leasing, you definitely want to check out, along with the Netflix documentary by Ava DuVernay. Amazing, amazing director. It's called 13th, and it walks you through from quote unquote slavery being abolished to the 13th Amendment and how that loophole devastates lives and continues to be the sole source of a means of slavery during the capitalist era today.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, this Bayview article, please check that out as well. That's where I got this photo from. Uh, yes. So debt peonage. This right here. This is a symbolism of what still goes on today. Like we see sex trafficking and voluntary servitude going on in little bits and pieces. People have heard of Libya back when Gaddafi was killed, and
Mm-hmm.
all of the slave trade that was going on there and still going on to this day. By the way, came to light. People like, oh my God, slavery still exists. Yes, it's just being documented on camera for you to see. But if you look it up,
Mm-hmm.
like not Google search engines, but other things, it's still around. It's still there. And
Mm-hmm.
with this penitentiary in Louisiana, it definitely points to that too. People picking cotton out in the fields, like yes, that imagery is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where is it? I think that was here. It is right here. The practices of slavery and human trafficking are still prevalent in modern America, with an estimated 17,500 foreign nationals and 400,000 Americans being trafficked into and within the U.S. every year, with 80% of those being women and children. And that is a low ball. That is informal as far as I'm
Mm-hmm.
concerned, because the federal government does not do due diligence
Yes.
to accurately document things, as we all know. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
grown up in the system, we know how it is. But that
Yes.
does give you some kind of picture, right?
Mm-hmm. And back to what you were saying about the debt,
Mhm.
even in the current prison system, like you get attached with fines and stuff, even while you're sitting in jail. And for the most part, your
Yes,
sentence
yes.
is not complete until those fines are paid off. When you come out, um, my person, for example, when he comes out and hopefully less than the time that they have given him, but it is documented that part of his sentence is to pay back a part of this money, and it does that part of his sentence doesn't start until he's free, and they can lock you back up if you don't make those payments, right?
And,
So
oh my goodness.
it's
And
like a
see,
recurring system. It's a
right.
recurring system because
And
you
the
lock me
trauma
up.
and the anxiety of waiting is
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. People don't understand the kind of trauma and disorientation being that causes it. And if you're out, it doesn't, then you happen to be quote unquote free, it doesn't change the fact that you're still waiting something. There's this
Institutionalized.
impending feeling of doom. I've felt that, and it's not great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That alone is one thing, but to compound everything else on it, and then compound the generational trauma and the trauma that in itself entails, there's a lot to dissect there. And that's actually something that we're going to get into on the
Mm-hmm.
next little piece. Um, we are going to go. We're basically going to take a break. I'm going to send you another link, and we will hop back on, and we're going to get into more about the trauma that comes within our peoples when it comes to the prison system, and
Mm-hmm.
how that continues to keep us mentally, behind bars,
Yes.
and the way that that also affects relationships in our community as well, ever since, especially the war on drugs, where women and men were ripped apart like on
Mm-hmm.
a large scale. That has had rippling effects throughout our community ever since then, ever since the start of it, because it is still ongoing. And one thing I do want to point out before we wrap up is the 94 crime bill. Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and so many other politicians that enforced this and helped upkeep it over the years. It helped further cement the fact that we are the largest incarceration system in the world.
And I know we don't want to give credit a lot of times, but someone that you left out of there
Right.
is Donald Trump. And I
Yes,
know that as black folks, we don't want to give this man credit for nothing, but I can assure you that over his 4 years, more black men walked out of those prisons
that's true.
than under any other president because of the pushes that he made with the, I believe it was Act, Second Act or Act. I'll find the act, but I was following it as it was happening, so I know when they were
But
released from
you,
prison.
right, but you know what? At the same time, there were people that he was being an a-hole about, of like not pardoning and not letting off of like death row and things like that. Not to mention the Haitians that he was being ridiculous about. Not to mention uh forgetting the last one, but like there's let's not even forget Puerto Rico. There's so many different things of people that he was still doing other, like it was like a balancing act up
No,
in.
I get it. I get it. But with every
I do
politician,
feel
there
you
is
though.
good and bad.
Oh
So we
yes.
have to acknowledge the
Right.
good that happens, especially in this topic. Like for this topic
Yeah.
specifically, prison. Anytime a group of people are freed from behind these cells, I want
Mhm.
to acknowledge the person responsible for that. Um,
Speaking of, I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't know if you know of Shakabuna. Kendall Shakabuna Marshall was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 17, a year before I was born in 1988. And it was a part of like an armed robbery or something. Stuff went haywire. Someone was
mhm.
killed. He was charged. That was the first time he was ever like, something happened like that. So everyone deserves not only a second chance, but the way that they lock us up, especially our kids. He was 17 and send you to a life behind bars. No, and Pennsylvania is one of the cruelest systems when it comes to that,
Oh
especially
yes, I
men.
know, and I wish I
Um,
didn't know.
so for him to be released Now he's out of that system, and behind bars over the past like 20, 30 years. He's done so much work behind bars to help mentally liberate other people, whether it's behind
Mhm.
bars or outside of bars, to amass a following and a group, an organized group of people to help combat these issues. He helped co-found the Human Rights Coalition, I believe it is. um, and a couple of other things. He has a prison radio podcast, and he does his work. So now that he's out, he's a testimony to people that can really do that work, but it takes a village. And
Yes, and I wanted to tell you real quick that act was called the First Step Act. And it's the most sweeping is noted as the most sweeping overhaul of the federal criminal justice system in a generation. And at its passage, more than 3,000 inmates had been released
wow,
on based on non-violent drug charges.
and this is
Right.
recent.
This was 20 what was this 2020. This happened under the Trump administration, so the
Wow.
date, I think 2019, 2020. This is the time. So I know that he had a lot that he did wrong, but for 3,000 people, mostly of color, to be released from prison, right? We have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge it. Um because that's not something small.
I agree. I agree. I think every little step that we take is something that we need to take note of, because it really does encourage us to make sure it gives us a gauge. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because when we're looking at something every day, and it can seem like we're not making any progress. Um,
Yes, and this act is directly targeted at offenses involving crack cocaine, and we know how those type of sentences, as you
right.
said, can be a life sentence for some people.
Mhm.
So we got to give credit where credit due. We can tear them down all we want, but we got to make sure we give them the credit too, where it's due.
You're right. You're right. All right, Tasliym, first of seven. It has been a pleasure to have you. We are don't you just keep it locked. Take like a 5 minute break. I'm
Okay.
gonna set us up for the next one, and we'll do like a 20, 25 minute thing. Before you take off, I know you're busy, and I'm busy as
Yes.
well. But I want to thank you for joining us, everyone. Please go check her out on social media. I will put links up for y'all to follow momentarily, so stay locked for that. Do not worry, or I'll just have it ready for when yeah, but everyone, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that this information, you take it and let it soak in. There are many other links I want to infuse into this episode, so that you can check those out as well. Make sure you meditate on your path, celebrate your being, liberate your spirit, and educate yourself. I'm John Tell. Have a good one.